Hello, friends. Welcome to Middletown Meeting and our hosting of quarterly meeting here on October 23rd, 2022. Just a little background very quickly. One of the reasons why we have Sandra coming is because we have a men's group that has traveled for a couple of years up to Maine to be with a Quaker minister named Ralph Green, who has had a long-standing concern for indigenous peoples in Maine. And because of that concern, we invited Ralph last summer to do a retreat up in the Poconos near Wyalusing, where John Woolman met Poponik, a Lenape-Munsee chief. And out of that retreat, we learned a lot about the history of indigenous peoples in this region. So what we wanted to do was have something around that theme for this quarterly meeting, and a natural theme to be to invite somebody from the PYM collaborative group called the First Contact Reconciliation Collaborative. So we have Sandra Boone here today, Sandra Boone Murphy, who is I guess a former member of Atlantic City area meeting and also Mickelton meeting. She was one of the founding members of the First Contact Reconciliation Collaborative back in 2017. And this collaborative actually picks up the work of the old PYM Indian Committee, which generally and I'm sure Sandra will probably correct me with this, but they were mostly a grant-making committee. They've morphed over into a grant-making committee to help indigenous peoples in this area. But the PYM First Contact Reconciliation Collaborative, I believe, gets more involved with the issues and concerns, one, about the history of indigenous peoples in this region, and two, with helping those indigenous peoples who are still amongst us. And we're going to learn about that today. For a really good understanding of Sandra Boone, I urge you to go to our newest quarterly meeting newsletter, where I did an interview with Sandra and she answered questions which I found quite intriguing. So after working and interviewing Sandra, I have no doubt in her ability to open that window into First Peoples issues and concerns in a way that clarifies and enlightens, and I'm looking forward to her presentation. So I welcome Sandra to our quarterly meeting. Thank you, Sandra, for being here.
Thank you, Rich. And thank you to everyone. It's been a lovely gathering. And blessed our 8th day. We are Sandra Boone and bring traditional greetings from our home meeting, Atlantic City area friends, and have presented our minute of religious service to Concord Quarter by way of your meeting for worship with attention to business. For today's quarterly meeting, we come with humble gratitude for your invitation to gather, contemplating being called to the spirit of the original people of this land. Mm-hmm. Glory be of Creator, where today we are illuminating our growing edges, the art of being, acknowledging loving guidance. We are blessed to be informed by Nanticoke Lanai Lenape leadership as extended family, blessed to attend their public social gatherings, powwows as VIP guests, the non-public familial gatherings and sacred ceremonies on their Cohansik tribal grounds. We acknowledge one's relationship to place, Kinefin, where we are informed by intersensory and kinesthetic perceptions. We play, naturally analyzing whole, parts of the whole, part being whole, noticing all being holy. Having clearness with friends and recognizing light grading among communities, tribal nation, Sheikh be home nest, and sanctuary of Lan Murah. We are walking under the stars and moon, over the earth, noticing roots, interconnecting and cooperating. And most intentionally, we are partnering with Jim Murphy. Blessings of Creator, who has prepared this gathering, rejoicing justice in time for Lenapehoking, for all creation. We maintain a practice of reconciling by acknowledging the indigenous people of the land we occupy. Let us acknowledge that all Concord Quarter Friends meeting houses are on the ancestral homeland of Lenape people. This land, this tiny fraction of Lenapehoking, is Lenape territory. This is the land of Lenape sacred instructions, sovereignty, cultural lifeways, wisdom, proprietary knowledge, ceremonies, governance, storytelling, arts, and reciprocity with this land and its beings. Land where Lenape are providing spirit and provided by spirit, food, shelter, clothing, mutual exchanges, all land gifted blessings. Concord Quarter Friends joining virtually may likely be on Lenapehoking too, and for all who may be afar, let us acknowledge that we are all on ancient indigenous land. This friend is speaking to you from Cecil County, Maryland, also Lenape territory. As in the past, and still today, and forever will be, this land is of Lenape people, the original people, also called by other indigenous communities as grandfathers of this land, now more than 12,000 years, more than 600 generations, time immemorial. May this acknowledgement set faithful acts of light in motion. I have an idea. It's to play a game before changing some of the slides. The game is called The Big Wind Blows, and some of you may be familiar with it, and we'll adapt that to our virtual environment. So after a slide, I may express a statement of an experience. And if you share that experience with this person, your speaker, let's just do a wave. Let's shake things off. We're sitting here a long time this morning. So wave your hands, your arms, your foot, your body, wave something. Are we ready? So let's play The Big Wind Blows. This friend's experience is along tidewater. If you have experience along tidewater, go ahead and wave. Let's rejoice. We are fluid while remaining in place, adapting as required and as possible. On being called, we are of the land and water, inseparable. Relationship is with a vast homeland. We are of the pines, oak, and cedar, white sand and clay, fresh waters to the ocean, all kin. Decades among Chester County and Delaware County, residing in Northbrook, remembering the orchard, Westchester, waking in the dairy farm homestead and spring house, and Birmingham Township with some best of life days with ancestors, serving families and children in education programs, Little People in Downingtown, Westchester, Even Friends, Rose Tree Media, Elwyn Institute, Kennett Square's Mary D. Lang. We are at home still here by loving those of the barns, the waters, the fields, co-workers, and institutions. In part, this is how we sense belonging might be felt. And given this broad brush, how might we identify as neighbors? Neighbor, one who dwells nearby. Yes, and something more, right? How might we love our neighbors? Building community, being communal, and by being a good neighbor. The big wind blows this friend's experience at home and other places. Have you experienced at home and other places? Beyond attributing a neighbor as someone who dwells nearby, some wisdom is gleaned from friend Rachel Davis Du Bois, who is known for her teachings originating techniques for intentional, regional, mixed small group dialogues, where people's way of living were unknown to one another, and by lived experiences where they held common ground. Rachel's work may be familiar to you, known as living room conversations. Over time, this work called Rachel to travel, including abroad to Germany after World War II, and blossomed into cross-cultural work with Martin Luther King Jr. We are encouraged by faith, dutifully, to come alongside, as early friends suggested, with all of Creator, in spirit, by spirit, in oneness, neighboring one with another. As a child, we were tendered by listening to the community elders, to children, to animals, to waterways. It is those neighbors who openly gifted their still small voices to one another, potentially benefiting from the amplitude of light within. We continue to labor through animal and child rights, AWA, ADA, IEPs, structures of society. We experience Indigenous powwows and Indigenous Gilded Arts festivals where there is abundant diversity and living arts, being with the land, and lean in nearer one another, neighboring. Living experiences with these neighbors, yet fine institutions were and are still touting that Indigenous people are gone. Gone, we'd just been communing, not a reenactment, not a fairy tale. We are breaking bread together while untruths abound. This unsettling discord grounds one's beacon of light with a minute of religious service by, for, and of Salem Quarter, lovingly made available to Concord Quarter. The big wind blows. This friend's experience with neighbors. If you have experience with neighbors, give a wave, shake it out. As friends of Salem Quarter, we recognized long ago that blessed light of Goshen, rising of Lenape-Hoking, and simply asked for the formation of Salem Quarter Indian Affairs Committee. Salem Quarter was easy with this request. With friendly approval, we continued to worship with local tribal nations and listen. We broke bread. We researched and broke bread. We showed up and broke bread. The tribes were no longer hiding in plain sight. We were on the road venturing to speak truths among South Jersey friends. We identified talking points and communities leaned in, acknowledging what has been missing from our education, missing from our conversations, missing in our hearts. And we recognized our still voices. Salem Quarter Worship and Ministry crafted and continues care of one's minute of religious service with the Nanticoke Lenni Lenape tribal nation and citizens, living into and propagating earliest intentions. We are walking with gratitude, neighboring, sensing truths and noticing disregard, listening and seeking reconciliation with the original people of this land, our original hosts, one's neighbors who are of spirit-led, obligatory hospitality, radical hospitality, still here and seeking justice through grounded ways of being. Glory be Creator. We read Indigenous peoples' proclamations and resolutions toward countering widespread contemporary disregard, stereotypes, biases. We hear extended families' stories. We are called to love thy neighbor, love into justice, peaceably, and at times assertively. At one point in recent history, the Cohansey people, now identifying as the Nanticoke Lenni Lenape tribal nation, headquartered in southern Jersey, told us how the state abruptly, without consultation, stopped recognizing their sovereignty. This was during a time when the state of New Jersey had already appointed a commission on American Indian Affairs, where 3 state-recognized tribal nations were seated and serving. Identity, all gone. Taken away. Removed by someone's ignorance and the stroke of a pen. This discrepancy accosted the rights of these citizens, taxpayers, with ancestry immemorial, who were being denied the right to sell their authentic crafts as Indigenous arts, denied their livelihood. They no longer qualified as minority business persons for minority small business loans. Their children were no longer able to qualify for Indigenous student scholarships. Institutionally, their health disparities, such as diabetes, no longer mattered. An oxymoron where the whole of New Jersey Commission had continued to meet and serve while being denied official reaffirmation, being denied justice. Would acts of cultural genocide prevail yet again? Salem Quarter Indian Affairs Committee leaned closer, asking Nanticoke Lenni Lenape leadership, how might we stand with you? By listening, then acting, the voice of friends was harnessed as a letter, an amicus brief. This friend is that signatory. We needed to prepare should we be called to testify, and prepare we did. Delays caused harms, and eventually, now the former New Jersey Attorney General, Gubir Grewal, resolved the case and reaffirmed the Nanticoke Lenni Lenape tribal nations people. Remediating the state's error also provided way to reaffirm the state's relationship with the Ramapo Lenape and Powhatan Lenape nations. Celebrating briefly, we walk just enlightened, finding so much more to be securing. The big wind blows. This friend's experience with acts of kindness. Do you have experience with acts of kindness too? In the recent Concord Quarter newsletter, there's a post by Rich Ailes, an interview with your presenter, addressing one's decades-long wondering about Philadelphia yearly meeting space with sovereign Indigenous peoples. Continuing to function as a granting group tied to Friends' legacy and predominant culture's ways of being, PYM continues to practice philanthropic good intentions. And in Lumbe Edgar Villanueva's words, Philanthropy? Honey, we need an intervention. Diverting the preposterous, wrong order. Now existing in parallel, love of Salem Quarter Indian Affairs Committee in relationship with the Nanticoke Lenni Lenape tribal nation and their relations led to the proposal and approval for your First Contact Reconciliation Collaborative. Toward further understanding this nation's history, a history rooted in ancient papal bulls, doctrines of discovery, this friend is member of the National Congress of American Indians and National Native American Boarding School Healing Coalition. In 2018, during a local conference among friends, Mark Charles stated what became the first sentence of his book, Unsettling Truths. You cannot discover lands already inhabited. We have met with Indigenous leadership across Turtle Island. Mark Trahant, editor of Indian Country Today, Mark Goldtooth, director of Indigenous Environmental Network, John Echohawk, co-founder and executive director of the National Native American Rights Fund, Denise Altvader, Passamaquoddy of American Friends Service Committee's Maine Wabanaki program, and gathered with Indigenous interfaith ministers at the National Cathedral. These are just some of the examples where we have become informed toward learning where peace continues to be denied or elusive, ultimately toward living more justly, being good neighbors by faith and practice, neighboring. The big wind blows this friend's experience with trying something new. So if you have experience with trying something new, let it go. Righting wrongs might require new perspectives and habits, ways of being. In one's fondness of coming upon shells along the beach, feathers, pine cones, bones along a path, we often place the gem in our pocket as a story to share with others or a wonder to be investigated. More recently, we have come to understand that each of these collectibles already has a home, a place to dwell. While there is reason to admire, we now leave each being in place for the next admirer, the next neighbor who passes by. There have been several heartfelt journeys for rematriating, returning these beings who are meant for everyone. For this, we have written Rematriation, a Spiritual Relationship. All the wonders, gifts pictured, shiny, dull, smooth, rough, soft, hard, solid, variegated, small, large, young, and old, are making their way back to where they belong. Each return has been placed with a story that includes gratitude for being inspirational teachers, acknowledgement of their relations, and an apology for having been removed. With clearness, the return of these precious gifts of the Creator is witness of caring for Earth as well as her people. Stewardship. There is spiritual joy in rematriating life of the ocean to the beach. Should there be kin, shell, pebble, feather, bone, along coming paths, they will be intentionally honored more simply in that moment and remain in relationship to where they belong. And the big wind blows, this friend's experience giving back something that is meant for everyone. And might you have that same experience? Be mindful. Reflect. Be of good health. Sláinte. Medicines for body, mind, and soul by the keeper of the seeds, providing a healing herb rock garden of lavender, rosemary, thyme, mint, marigolds, sage, preparing, seeking, being a safe haven, as Araminta Ross of Eastern Shore, Maryland, has prepared a place for you. The big wind blows this friend's experience being mindful, reflective, and with good health. And so if you have that experience of being mindful, reflective, or with good health, there is hope and faith beyond imperialistic lifeways tangled in politics and economics, and beyond being financially philanthropic. Friends show up with neighbors. We're showing up worshiping. We show up fellowshipping. We show up commemorating. We show up testifying. We show up listening. We show up in peace and friendship. We show up. We honor the promise. Reconciliations, rematriations, righting wrongs. We acknowledge Lenape sovereignty, where discernment of the Lenape presence is continuous, familial, historic, with ongoing self-governance, providing truth, being convinced, having convincement, convincing as led. How are we led? What actions lead to a just life? Let's examine a couple of things. First of all, mascotry, harmful mascotry and imagery. We hear from Indigenous peoples that it is harmful. I'm not your mascot, which is countered by predominant voice. We're honoring you. We have reports from the American Psychological Association, APA, calling for the retirement of all American Indian mascots, symbols, images, and personalities by schools, colleges, universities, and athletic teams. Such mascotry concerns involve lowered self-esteem, identity issues, cultural misinformation, infringements of civil rights, and counter statements in support of good sportsmanship, student safety, inclusion, and equity. By remaining quiet or remaining rigid, might non-Indigenous peoples be perpetuating the harms, particularly in the state of Pennsylvania, where Indigenous peoples leave their homelands seeking employment and livelihood in Penn's Woods. Here, might friends find unity and privilege toward voicing the harmful mascotry concern, toward writing what we've inherited, advocating with political representatives, regional and state, toward peace and friendship? John Lewis might call this good trouble. Another call to action being supported by Friends Committee on National Legislation. We are seeking to establish a Truth and Healing Commission on Indian boarding school policies in the U.S. Companion bills, House of Representatives 5444 and Senate 2907. Friends were involved in Indian boarding schools, mission schools, day, residential, industrial, agricultural schools. The Department of the Interior has released a preliminary report of these schools. Unique to Friends, our records are readily available. We have been examining our records and government records and wonder about Friends' preparedness for truth and reconciliation, transparency, and accountability. And so the big wind blows this Friends experience where we let our life speak. And might you let your life speak? For non-Indigenous folks, if and when holding a sense of grieving or remorse, rather than wallowing, diverting, or diluting spirit within, might we be open, be informed, be actively gifting your light being called into this world, your light meant for this world. Seeking balance, mindfulness, faith, and hope, seeking the wisdom of others like yourself who have come through. Some are Eileen Flanagan and Suzanne Simard. Seek Indigenous wisdom, such as Roxanne Dunbar Ortiz and Robin Wall Kimmerer have shared generously. For those of us in unprogrammed meetings, we carry a responsibility in relationship with expectant, waiting worship. As children of the light, we hear, let our lives speak. Be enlivened by hearing the call within. You may find yourself surprised as this friend who, as a youngster, was a voiceless communicator. You may find yourself unbridled as one's horses, sentient. Fear not naming what rises within. Fear not unbridling one's soul, like carefully crafted beadwork, one stitch at a time. As long as the sun shines and the rivers flow, our hearts are bound to yours. Treaty people, Cohansey, Lenape, and Salem Quarter friends since 1675 who met under the sacred oak, agreeing to live in peace and friendship perpetually. We have reconciliation acts to be fulfilled, inclusive curriculum, acknowledging diverse community child welfare protocols, land-grant college scholarships, uninterrupted Lenape affirmation, relationships with the state and other governments, care of Mother Earth. Might we humbly, openly explore eras of dismissing and marginalizing our neighbors, biased views of financial, paternalistic oversight, and/or biases of assimilation efforts. For Lenape, friends are still here. For friends, Lenape are still here. By listening, watching, simply being, one's journey of experiences becomes one's teacher. We acknowledge being informed by the ancestral land of the Lenape people, specifically the Kichimichis, the Shayikpe homeland. Now known as South Jersey, we have lifeways, some like your own, of grasses, reeds, streams, rivers, coves, lakes, bays, ocean, cranberry bogs, beach plums, blueberry fields, blackberries, strawberries, corn, tomato, asparagus, squash, oak, cedar, buttonwood, birch trees, iron ore, white sand gravel pits, eagles, ospreys, plovers, killdeer, goldfinches, barn swallows, purple martins, blue jays, robins, turkeys, turtles, terrapins, tree frogs, toads, salamanders, deer, raccoon, rabbits, squirrels, chipmunks, pine barrens, Cohansey, Kirkwood watershed, where Lenape tribal communities continue to live on Lenapehoking, still here on Shayikpe, historic, continuous, familial, with self-determined governance, sovereign Lenape people. The big wind blows this friend's experience, willing to accept the legacy of being a treaty person. Might you be willing to accept the legacy of being a treaty person? So may today's gathering set faithful acts of light in motion. These are just a few sources of information for you to have, and we can put these in the chat. We can also combine these with some other unique sources that might be generated through our conversation. And with that, there is forevermore. We're wondering about what part of the story that might have been meaningful to you. We're wondering what you might be left wondering about. And wondering whether there might be an ask rising about a particular slide or comment. And with that, perhaps we can open for conversation.
Friends, before we entertain questions, I would suggest we enter into worship for a few minutes because we've given ministry, I believe. So let us sit in silence and worship for a while.